We're kind of in the Cambrian explosion phase of things. So the mistake to make right now is be like, okay, I'm gonna like try to write down the perfect thing and implement that because it's gonna be out of date in 2 months.
All right, folks, welcome to Agents of Scale. This is the podcast where we go behind the scenes with leaders who are figuring out how to use AI at scale. I'm Wade Foster, your host, co-founder, and CEO at Zapier, and today I am talking to Chris Pedregal. He is the co-founder and CEO of Granola, and I gotta admit, Granola was probably... I try a lot of AI tools, a lot, and Granola stuck instantly, which is pretty rare. Most I try and say, okay, cool, that was interesting. But Granola stuck quick. So we're going to talk a lot about his experience building Granola. But Chris is also a pretty legendary builder. He's built a lot of stuff throughout the years. And so we'll probably get into a lot of the things that led up to Granola, which leads me to my first question. Chris, tell me about Scrambler Mail. What is this?
Oh, wow. I don't think I've heard anyone say that word for about 15 or 20 years. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so this was my sophomore year at Stanford. So what was that, 2004? And it was my first startup. I started it with my very good friend, Matthew Cowan, who's now like the engineering architect at Granola, 20 years later, which is awesome. He joined a couple months ago. And basic idea was secure email. It was like, how do you build secure email when that was not easy? Like there were PGP keys you could generate. You could send your key in the email. And and we had it was a very different time. I remember we had like 2 little servers running in the corner of our office because that's how you'd build things at the time.
You were what, 19 at the time? Something like sophomore?
That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you decide to build secure email? That's like I don't know that I was thinking about stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So let's see. So my freshman year, I joined this at Stanford. They have these things called inter-seminars, and you basically they have like some famous faculty member, and they'll let in like 6 or 8 students, and you get to just hang out with them on a topic. And there's this really incredible professor named Dan Bonnet in cryptography, right? So I tried to get into, I signed up for it. I showed up on my first day, and I was waitlisted, like way down the wait list. And, 17, 18-year-old Chris I was like aghast. I'm like, I'm a great fit for this. Like down the line, I realized like the people who were in that class was like Sam Altman, Blake from Firefox, Aaron Schwartz, like literally these legends. And I so I just kept showing up week after week after week. Eventually they just let me into the intro seminar. And I learned about crypto, learned about security. And the fascinating thing, maybe there's a theme here with like AI as well, but the fascinating thing about security is that the algorithms are amazing. They're really secure. The problems, the interface with people. Right, all the security vulnerabilities are like come down to this security solution's hard to use, hard to understand. The classic, in the security community, this idea of like you force someone to change their password every 2 weeks, and what ends up happening is everyone writes their password on a sticky next to their computer because and that's the classic example. So, I think in my sophomore year, I took a bunch of HCI, human computer interaction classes, and kind of fell in love with that. And I was like, wait a second, like the secure email problem's not. Like the encryption algorithms exist. It's actually a human problem. How do we design that experience to make it good? But at 18, 19, you have no idea how the world works. You have no idea, which is kind of a blessing and a curse, right? Like I would never start a secure email company knowing everything I know now. But I learned a ton, and it was a lot of fun. It was not a success.
I feel like that's kind of every founder's like famous last words is how hard could it be?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is like, I think not that I have what do I know? Like I don't have a ton of experience, but like, what is a good startup idea today? Almost by definition, should have been a bad one yesterday or last year, right? And it's like something's changed in the world where these ideas that were bad ideas all of a sudden became viable or great ideas. But it's not like there's some light that goes off that makes it obvious, right? So it's almost like you need naive young people who don't know better to go and try to do the same thing other people have done in the past and failed, and now is like happens to be the time where it works. There's something really interesting about that.
Do you think, so speaking of that kind of ties into another one. Do you think Socratic, the other company you founded, do you think it sort of falls in that camp?
So Socratic, it was my last startup. It got acquired by Google. It was this iOS app. You take a photo of a homework problem and it would read, OCR it. So it would like read the text in there and it would try to teach you how to do it. And we started this company in 2013, sold it in 2018. So it's amazing. The stuff we dreamed of, like one day, in 30 years being able to do potentially, is all possible today. And it's all possible out of the box with, the latest LLM from the big labs. So I think a lot of the work we did at the time was defined by the constraints of the technology that existed. So it's like a completely different world now. And I'm glad for it, right? It's like way easier to learn from technology now. You can learn in ways that were unthinkable 5-6 years ago. So I think that's a great change. It's fascinating. I don't think I expected to see that kind of change in my lifetime, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it mirrors, though, I think, kind of some of the stuff we've even seen just like working on Zapier. We started the company in 2011, and there's all these problems that, we kind of felt were like just unsolvable. Like we beat our head against the wall over and over again, and okay, we maybe came up with like a half-baked idea that sort of kind of worked, but not really. Mm-hmm. And now you plop, one of these big LLMs in, and you go back to all those problems, and you're like, hey, that we actually might be able to solve that now, like legitimately solve it. Or in some cases, it just like got solved. And you're like, well, I guess we never thought that this would be the right way to go build it.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it's one of the most fun moments in history to be building, because there's all the surface area of solvable problems has exploded over the last 3 years. And so there are all these problems out there that are now solvable, but a lot of people just haven't gotten to them, right? And it's like, it's doable now. You get a crack at it, which is the most fun time. Yeah.
Totally. If you weren't working on Granola, what's at the top of your list of other problems that are now solvable that you might be?
Yeah, I think there's that's a great question. There are two things. One is I see my kids interact with ChatGPT, and it just makes my brain go in 100 different directions. They're 6 and 8 now. So younger than this. It wasn't like high school homework like with Socratic, but it's more like, what's in the world? What are these things? How do they work? How do they connect? Like that kind of stuff. So I think that would be fascinating to work on. There's some YouTube, the web. There's all like even apps on your iPad or iPhone. Like all the business models there are always trying to pull kids into like either weird rabbit holes of content or like upselling them to subscriptions. And I don't really feel good about letting them play with any of that. But I think you could imagine a world which is like a pure offline LLM, but an experience designed on top of that. That's much more like the Young Ladies Illustrated primer, from the Neil Stephenson's novel. Like, I think that would be a freaking blast to design.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like education specifically, it's just the model has been so unchanged for, at least in the United States, it's not changed since, I don't know, like World War II, something like that. And with AI, it really does feel like you could reinvent the whole education system from the ground up and get something much, much better.
Yeah, I think for me personally, just because I spent 5 years working really hard on Socratic, I'm more interested in like learning than education. The Mark Twain quote, which is basically never let your education interfere with your learning. I feel like, sure, AI can help you with your homework or whatnot, but I wonder if there is like something much more ambitious there, which is actually help you shape your worldview, help you shape, how you think about things. And the converse is also true, right? If we're not careful, that's implicitly going to happen, and it might happen in ways that are non-intended or that don't make us smarter, stronger thinkers.
You build a product in like a really quite crowded space.
Yeah.
The idea of like, hey, we're gonna go do meeting recording, which is probably not exactly how you would describe it, but canonically that's kind of the category that Granola plays in.
Yeah.
What did you see there that made you think, like the world needs another one of these products?
Great question. So we very begrudgingly entered the AI meeting note space, and I'll give you the short answer. The short answer is that with AI, it's very, very easy to hook something up and get a basic version of something working, right? It's easier than it ever has been to create a mediocre or an okay experience. And when you looked around, I think these like AI meeting note bots, like companies, technically it's quite impressive. They join a meeting, they transcribe, they output a generic summary. But if you really looked at it from a user's perspective in terms of like, hey, what job to be done? Like, what problem is this solving for me? Is this what I want? It really, really just didn't hit the mark. And the thing that really, like the nail in the coffin, I was like, okay, now we have to do this, is that we interviewed tons of people who used these other products, and all of them said that they still took their own notes, even if there was the bot in the meeting, right? And the reason for that is that the most important note is usually something that only you can write down or is in your head. It's like, let's say if you're interviewing a candidate and you're like, oh, this guy is really like mean, like that is the one note that you care about that interview, because you probably don't want to hire that person, but like the AI transcript's not going to spit that out for you, right? So, and if you really think about it, it's like, okay, what's the job to be done? Like, what do we want these tools to do? It's to augment our abilities and to augment our thinking. So like the final test for me was like, I didn't want to use any of those other tools, and Sam and I wanted to build something that we wanted to use. And once you start saying, okay, well, what do I want to use? What would make for a great experience? It pushed us down a completely different path. And on the surface, it's like, oh, Granola generates notes. All these other companies generate notes. But if you actually look at what are the specific problems we're solving and how we're going about doing it, I think we're on very, very, very different trajectories.
That is a very astute observation, because I think that's partially why it stuck for me. Is like, in a lot of ways, I take a lot of notes still with Granola. Mm-hmm. Like, I still am like a very active participant in the note-taking process. Mm-hmm. It's just Granola makes them way better for me at the end of the day. Yeah. And I never really wanted to outsource the entire note-taking process, because it keeps like the act of taking notes like holds my attention. Yeah. Whereas if you just sort of say, hey, somebody else go do this, like it's just easy for me to like let my brain wander to something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that's going to come up more and more with AI. I think that there's busy work, and then there's like thinking work, right? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the same task can be a combination of both. And I think the future we want is a world where all the busy work is outsourced to AI and all the thinking work is kind of in the hands of a human. If you do the opposite, I think it's disastrous. But like the nefarious easy thing to do is like, oh, I'm outsourcing some of the busy work, but accidentally outsourcing some of the thinking. And I think that's something we just have to be very, very mindful of. And so, for example, with Granola, depending on the meeting, there are plenty of meetings where I never would have taken any notes. And mm-hmm. I don't take any notes in Granola, and now I have Granola notes, and that's so much better than not having any notes. But then the meetings that are really important, or if I'm doing a user test, I'm still taking a lot of notes, because it's a lot about my judgment in that meeting, but I don't have to worry about a lot of the details that they say. You know what mm-hmm. I'm saying? It's like I'm not worried about if there's a specific number that they mention, trying to jot that down. So it's like the busy note capture I've outsourced, but the thinking, the real-time critical thinking, I'm still doing. And hopefully, that's a philosophical point for us. So hopefully we keep building the product with that in mind.
On that note, one thing I often observe is the folks who are behind these products often use the product in more sophisticated ways than their average user of those. So I'm curious, what do you and what did the team at Granola, how do you all use Granola that is different from what you come across in your user testing and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Granola team basically lives in the future, or lives in the Granola future. So we think we use Granola the way the world will use Granola in maybe 6 months or 12 months. And there are lots of things we do differently, but I think that the really big idea here is context selection and shared context, right? So let me step back for a second. Basically, for AI to be useful, I think you need two things. I think you need to have good prompts, like good ways to instruct the AI, and you also need to have the right context. And that question of what is the right context is like super nuanced and super interesting, and will probably be one of the big open questions for the next decade. And at Granola, we have spent a lot of effort creating these like shared internal folders inside of the company, where there's one that's like, here are all the user calls, here are all the sales calls, here are all our internal meetings, and then there's a mode where you can actually chat across all of that. So it's like the second brain for your company. The most interesting twist there, which I would not have foreseen before we built any of this, is that there's still this notion of my personal private context within the work environment. So it's great that Granola has access to all the user calls, to all the internal, like all hands and team meetings. But it's also great that my Granola has access to my one-on-ones, to my leadership meetings. And that's not context that other people at Granola would have, but is super, super important to me. And I think that blend of like private, like personal work context plus like more public work context, that's where a lot of the value can be unlocked with AI.
Yeah, it's I think one of the challenges in most organization is that so much context does exist in the meetings, and usually that stuff gets lost to memory or lost to a recording that nobody ever accesses. It just kind of comes and goes. It's very fleeting, and unless some diligent employee makes sure that it happens in a structured way, it gets written in a memo, it gets encoded in the CRM, it happens in the project management tool, it doesn't happen. And only a small sliver of context usually makes it that way. And so there's all this latent history in organizations that you can capture if you do it in a like semi-structured way. Well, and in these cases, like AI can actually work with the unstructured data like fairly effectively, which is super helpful. What do you think the implications of that second brain are? Like, how do you think organizations will be different because they have access to this? What are the ways in which they will work that will look differently?
Yeah, it's a great question. One, I think organizations will organize themselves differently with this in mind. So by that, I think companies are going to start spending a lot of time creating the right context buckets or context systems inside of that company. So, for example, I was talking to Sam from 11 Labs, and he has spent a bunch of time and continues to spend time maintaining this custom GPT that has the company's like tone of voice, and every blog post, every tweet, they run through this, and they have two versions of it. One rewrites something in the tone of voice, and then another one critiques a piece of content to be in the tone of voice. And it's the new style guide, right? And that's just one example, but you can kind of imagine that across all these functions where it'll be someone's responsibility to make sure that there is an AI that has the most up-to-date context that represents the brand, the philosophy, the strategy, what have you, of that aspect of the organization. So I think that's one. And then I think the other one is making sure you have the right buckets or channels of context. So I was talking to the CEO of Clay, and he was basically like, you guys should, they use Granola, and he's like, you should come in and should teach us how to reorganize our meetings, reorganize what we share with whom, how do we change our internal OS of the company to maximize the sharing of useful context, but then making sure the private context doesn't get shared. And that's an open question, man. I think we're all gonna. That's like you can sit around and theorize about that, but it's really when you get a bunch of humans together with these tools and you see what the emergent behaviors are, like that's where it gets interesting.
Well, yeah, and I think that's an organizational choice. Somewhat at the end of the day, you think of companies like Bridgewater, where it was like, hey, everything's out there, everybody's available, and that's a choice that they would make. Versus if you put someone like Apple on the other extreme, they'd be like, no way, not going to happen. And so there's a little bit of like, well, what's the culture of the company like, and how do they treat some of this stuff at the end of the day? on Granola, so there's obviously, like, we've seen this just explosion of new software being built. Much of it is not sticking. A small, narrow set of it does stick, and I would consider Granola to be one of those things that does stick. So, like, what do you think you got right in order to enable Granola to stick so well? And, like, what's the takeaway for other builders to be able to identify, like, the patterns that...
Yeah, I think there are two things. One, and this was informed by a lifetime of trying to build products that people would build a habit around and failing or failing most of the time. One is that it's just very, very hard to build a habit. And whenever you decide to start a company or build a new product, you should think very carefully, is this a use case that I can actually get users to build a habit around or not? And meetings are fantastic for that, because you literally have them scheduled in the calendar, and Granola sends you a notification when your next meeting starts, and that's actually useful for users and a perfect way to, like, slip into a user's daily workflow. So I think that's the first thing, and that's probably the biggest thing that helped us. The second thing is, I think I mentioned something like this before, but it's the easiest time to build ever, and what that means is that to stand out, I think you really need to be phenomenal at something. And if you look at a lot of the AI products out there, like they're getting better, but they're still pretty crude, quite frankly, right? And I think the reason for that is like building something can be hard technically, but there's also you can't really speed up when you build something, you put it in front of people, and it's going to be wrong in a ton of different ways, and then you need to really listen to them and adapt and change. And that second part, that happens in human time. You can't really speed that up. Like, AI really speeds up the building side, but the, like, get feedback part and in a world where there's so many options, I think you really have to pick a narrow use case and just be 3, 4, 5x better at that very narrow use case, as opposed to something that's like 50% better, which maybe in the past would have been okay, but like right now it's not enough to stand out. And the generic models, like the Claudes and the ChatGPTs of the world, are surprisingly good at everything, right? Like, they're like surprisingly good at almost any task you give them. So to create a reason to use something else, you really have to be that much better.
Yeah. What do you think? Like, how do you figure out where those are at? I saw, like, when, ChatGPT launched, their meeting recorder, people were like, oh, that's the end of Granola. And as a power user of Granola, I was like, no way. Like, Granola, like, is just, it just captures that, like, last mile so well. Like, is that just simply, like, blood, sweat, and tears that you just sort of, like, just have to pour into it? Or is there something else?
In terms of what makes that different? Like, how do you get to be that much better, you're saying?
Yeah, that much better, yeah. It sounds like it's just like, hey, the user testing, all these other feedbacks is kind of what you're getting at.
I think it's basically that, like, you have two things you can control. It's like how wide is your aperture, or how narrow is your focus, right? So if you really narrow in, then you can optimize an experience for a narrow group that, people who are trying to serve many different types of users can't. And then the other one is you can just care 10,000 times more about that thing, right? And now, doing both of those things, does that mean you're not going to get steamrolled by the big company? I don't know. Like, that becomes like a crystal ball, like stargazing process. So far, though, I think I have seen. I kind of thought I thought you'd see all the kind of specific use case startups get killed, and I'm kind of seeing the opposite right now. And I think why is it? Like, basically, I was talking to Nabil, one of our investors, and he showed me the 15 different tools he uses that are all they're all AI tools, but they're all like the best at this one specific thing. And maybe I think that will consolidate to some point at some point over time. I do think there is something about just, if you really care about a problem, you can build such a better experience. And oftentimes the things you need to do for that have nothing to do with the AI or the technology, right? It can be the like for us, there are all these things, making sure the echo cancel. You could take headphones out halfway through a meeting and put them back in, and Granola just work. Like silly things like that you wouldn't expect to take effort, actually take a bunch of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's shift to how you are building Granola with AI. I find that one of the things I often observe with companies that have the benefit of having started after this sort of current generation of AI waves is they often look just very different than compared to, companies that have started before that. So how do you run Granola that is different from, say, how you ran, Socratic or what you saw at Google in your time there? Like what just feels very different in terms of the way you build?
Great. So some of these things are AI specific, and some of them I can't tell. Maybe it's just having done a startup before. So we're all in person every day, which I think there's been a big trend in that direction. But I think if you're early stage product building and need to make decisions and change directions quickly, which I think is a lot of AI product right now, being in person is killer. So I think that's number one. Number two is we Granola all meetings internally. It's just that's the default. Oftentimes multiple people are Granolaing meetings because, as you said, everyone takes slightly different notes. And we're pretty thoughtful about how those meetings are organized and shared internally. So you can very quickly query different types of data across the company. And we are something that's also pretty amazing is there's been a lot of focus so that anybody in the company can build dashboards, can make small, like not complicated changes to the code, but like there are all these requirements of like, hey, this button gets pushed off the screen when this thing happens. Like that's actually stuff that our CX team fixes themselves now, which was not the case 2 years ago when we started, which is pretty fantastic. And lastly, our CTO does a great job of this. We really push ourselves to use the latest coding tools, even if it's like the calculation's not like, does it net save us time today? It's more like we need to be on the bleeding edge over time, and we can't afford not to be. So we're constantly playing with the latest tools and forcing the team to switch those tools.
Got it. So it's, kind of usage of your own product, using Granola all the time. It's, designers and others like shipping code for maybe like the sort of marginal, quality of life or bug or something like that. Yeah. And then just living in the future. Like we're going to use and adopt all of these tools, even at maybe some short-term productivity risk that you'll take. And those feel like kind of maybe the category of ways in which you're doing. How has that impacted the way the organization looks? Like, do you have, are there certain job types that like exist or don't exist? Are there certain teams that are smaller or bigger? Like how are like compared to maybe a traditional company?
Was she our fourth or fifth hire was an LLM whisperer, which at the time we thought was a really cool job title, and I think now it's actually more common. So that's definitely one. Our CX team would be way larger right now if it weren't for the AI tools that we use and that we built internally. And then, we've had so much on our plate. We haven't done this yet, but we are looking to hire someone whose full-time job will just be internal AI tooling enablement. So if you have someone who's just focused on making sure everyone inside of the company can leverage AI to the fullest in ways that maybe would feel uncomfortable or you wouldn't expect, I think that'll be an unlock for us. But as you know, like sometimes things get crazy in startups, and there's a lot to deal with.
Yeah. This concept of like an AI automation engineer is something we see a lot inside of our user base, where folks, the tooling makes it such that everyone benefits, but there is still a even larger unlock when you have one or a couple of these people in the organization floating between teams, just saying, hey, like you can entirely redo this workflow. You can entirely redo this thing. And they end up saving, I think if you adopt the earlier you adopt like that type of person, it ends up compounding a lot down the line, because those are like entire things you don't have to solve down the line.
Yeah, you're making me feel even worse that we don't have this person, like this dedicated person in place. But it was our CTO until recently, so that's not a bad way to do it, I think.
Yeah, we felt this like in 2010 era. It was like the blitzscale era, and it was just like throw bodies at the problem, and eventually someday we'll sort of go sort it out.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of companies realized is, in theory, that sounds nice, but it's actually a lot harder to do that in practice, to like kind of circle back and like clean all this stuff up versus, just kind of invest in, a better way of doing it from day one, or as early as you can, of course. The companies you work with that are, founded pre, ChatGPT, pre this AI era, I think a lot of them are trying to figure out how to adopt AI, how to like transform their organizations. You see the CEO memo everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what advice do you have for those companies? A lot of them are like struggling to make the shift. And so what do you think it is from a tooling perspective or a culture perspective when you see the companies that are doing it best? Like, what are they doing that are different from, maybe the companies that are struggling?
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that it's still very early and we're in a period of transition. And the companies that seem to be, like, I think it is too early today to say this is the right way to do it. And I think a lot of the older, more traditional companies, that's how they're thinking about it. It's like, I want to find what is the best in class AI implementation across my org today. And we're kind of in the Cambrian explosion phase of things. So, for example, I think a company that's famous for this is Ramp, where they're Ramp employees are super liberal with what tools they can try and use. And the downside for that is they might have 4 tools inside the org that all do the same thing. The upside of that is they'll adopt a tool that works really well really quickly when other companies haven't even heard of it. And I think that the mistake to make right now is be like, okay, I'm gonna like try to write down the perfect thing and implement that because it's gonna be out of date in 2 months. Ramp was they were our first enterprise customer. Like, they signed us way before companies like half their size would even have considered it. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think honestly, like in the entire industry right now, you know that the thing is like we overestimate what can happen in a year and underestimate what can happen in 10 years. I think that's what's happening in AI. We've seen such tremendous advancements over the last couple of years, and then we're just looking around being like, oh, nothing. The world hasn't like completely changed, but I think 2, 3, 4 years from now, the way companies will work internally will look really different. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, that resonates. Like, kind of coming into this year, you hear, it's the year of the agent, and you're sort of like, well, yeah, I
hate
think you're
that
starting
term.
I know.
The agent kills me. Like, the idea makes it. Well, first of all, I think everyone has a different idea of what it means.
Sure.
But like, everything's an agent now, and I'm always like, what? Like, what do you mean by that?
We just want the agent, Chris. Yeah. Just give me the agent.
We need a launch agent. Yeah, we need a launch Granola agent.
I mean, there definitely is a hype cycle that's going on around this stuff. I think at the end of the day, people are just like, I just want something cool that does work for me. Like, that sounds amazing. So give it to me.
Yeah.
And, the sort of technical descriptions of these things are like, that's a little bit of a sideshow to like, just give me the cool thing.
Yeah.
It sounds like the core practice that you're sort of advocating here is one of like curiosity and experimentation. Sounds like that's what Ramp does well. It's like, hey, let's create this culture, and that's not just a like, that's not just like a platitude thing. Like, sure, it is like the people sort of feel willing, but there's like actual structural things, like their IT team, their procurement team, their legal teams are probably more risk-taking on some dimensions, and as a result, they're willing to take on whatever cost or burden comes with that, but then the other side, they get maybe this 6 months advantage, 12-month advantage of other companies in their space that are not willing to do that. And so if you're able to embrace this, you perhaps get some incremental advantages.
Exactly. I think that's a huge thing, which is basically kind of power to the people, like bottoms up. Let's see what rises to the top. And I think the other thing organizations should be thoughtful about proactively are these buckets of context, right? I really do think AI is only as useful as the context that you have. So how, like if you use Granola, just set the internal convention that all the meetings that can be public end up public in this place and therefore are queryable by everybody else. It's an org design decision more than anything. But then all those other tools can tap into that context and you get the max benefit from it.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of where all this stuff is going. One of the things I've heard you say before is, as machines get smarter, we're going to be constantly letting go of some of the things we used to do and then letting machines do that work. And then we'll sort of go move to something else. Like, I'm curious, do you have an example of what that looks like in practice? Like Granola, you all are living in the future. What are the things that you're maybe letting the machines take on? And how are you like now redeploying your own time and attention differently? And then where do you think that, how do you think that will look differently maybe a year from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think a very basic example is that for anyone who uses Granola, they're less worried about just capturing all the key data that someone says, and they're more focused on being present, asking better questions, trying to be critical of what's being said. I think we spend a lot of time right now doing information lookup, translating content that's in one format into another format, starting from scratch when we maybe don't have to. Like the best practices are over here, but then when we go to write the document, we start with a blank document rather than. And I think all of those things, AI is going to swoop in and do a lot for us. Like right now, by the time this episode comes out, we'll have launched this thing called recipes, which are basically these saved prompts inside of Granola, and you can make them as simple, as complicated as you want, and then you can share them. And what we've seen, we have a bunch of beta companies who use them, and basically one person will create this great recipe that'll do something that's very specific to that company. Like maybe it's how you organize your PRDs, and you're like, there's a PRD template or what have you, and they'll create that. And then they'll share that inside of the org, and then it kind of spreads like wildfire because it's useful in Granola, but it's codifying a lot of the internal like company culture or needs or way of doing things into AI, which is where a lot of the work is. And what we see with those is that AI today, and maybe forever, maybe this is the role of AI. I think it's a pretty positive view of the future. Is that AI is amazing at, if you give it the right context, at creating a first draft of things. Right? And it's like, instead of starting with a blank page, you start with a first draft that is based off your context. And then you can kind of use your judgment. You be more of an editor than a writer, like that thing. And I think that's going to happen all across the stack. So for example, what's a good example? So a question that I ask, the type of question that I now ask Granola, maybe this is like a little bit of the in living in the future thing, that I would not have imagined even like 6 months ago, is let's say we're like, our team's grown and I need to reorg my company. I need to reorg all the teams that are there. That's not the kind of question that I could have imagined I could go anywhere and have AI help me with. But because Granola has all my contacts, all my company's contacts, I can have a conversation with it and basically be like, oh, I know this person's super strong at this. It seems like you're not investing enough in this type of area. What if you put these people here? I'm like, oh, but I don't think this person's the right TL for whatever reason. And that's kind of mind blowing, right? That and you can say, oh, is that? And that's definitely not taking the thinking away from me. That is having a thought partner, because it's informed. But I do think the execution there really, really matters. Because I think if it's like you hit one button and it's like, here's what your company should look like, as opposed to having it really be something you work on together, it'll feel very different.
Yeah, you got my brain spinning a little bit. I there's like a whole bunch of ways that I think I could be using Granola better after you said that. Like one of the things I'm wondering is like I could start to ask it, what project are we not investing enough in? What project should be canceled? There's like more abstract like questions that don't necessarily pertain to one captured meeting, but exist across this whole corpus of information. that I can't even as a human, I can't pull that all into my own memory.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that blew my mind maybe 4 or 5 months ago when I had that light bulb go off. Like, so for example, now I go into a meeting. Let's say we have a meeting called the Four Musketeers. It's like it's our leadership meeting, and I'll ask Granola what we should talk about, right? And obviously it'll look at the agenda and what we talked about in the last version of that meeting, but it'll also look at every other meeting that I've been in or that is happening in the company, and it'll that shared context is absolutely killer, because it'll be like, these things that are not showing up anywhere, you didn't talk about these, like you probably should talk about them because I'm seeing some emergent stuff here that you should look into. So with this recipe launch, we had Matt Mockery, who's this like pretty well-known executive coach. I think he's Sam Altman's coach. He created a recipe, which is like Coach Me. And because Granola has this view of that personal context that I'm talking about, it can apply coaching advice. Like his curriculum's public. Like you can go out and you can read all the different ideas, but it applies it to your exact problems and situations. And I think that is just this killer application. I also use Granola for therapy and for personal stuff, so it really has a whole lot of visibility into what's going on into my life. But the first time I ran it, I read the feedback and I actually had to go take a walk. I literally had to close my computer and go take a walk, because it's stuff that it was basically like, Chris, you need to stop acting like a PM and start acting like a CEO, was like the headline, and then it went like boom, 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 and it's the kind of thing, no one talks to me like that, right? No one has the context, and no one has that relationship with me, and to see that from technology was a very special moment.
I mean, the coaching use case for AI to me is one of the best. Mm-hmm. It's infinitely patient. Mm-hmm. It doesn't butter you up or not. I mean, well,
well, it can be. It's sycophantic. Yeah. What was great about this recipe is that it was freaking brutal. Yeah, but that's
exactly,
up to you.
Exactly. Like that's one of the things when I ask the coach, I'm like, just tell me what tell me what I'm doing good, tell me what I'm doing bad, take out the fluff. And, to your point, I think this is really valuable, especially for folks who are in, leadership positions who don't always get, the sort of raw goods, so to speak.
I think there is something. Sorry, go ahead. No, there's something interesting about that one is, and this goes back to like AI as a tool or AI as SaaS. It felt great in Granola because it felt like, hey, this is my coach who has, like, I can use this or not use it as I want. It has my best interest at heart. I can control it. It would feel very different. There are tools like Gong or whatever, where it's like, it's a tool that's going to help assess, like let my manager assess me. And those are like very, very different feelings, AI as a tool is like a really important idea, I think.
Yeah, it's the opt-in element of it, where it's like, hey, I want this. I'm actively engaged, versus like someone is doing this, and also to me, which is still probably valuable. But
no, it's super valuable. I think it being private makes it feel different. And in the same way that like maybe going to Google and you can, back in the day, you'd go to Google and you could type in, and that felt like you could ask Google anything and no one would judge you or whatnot. I think that's very important here.
I'm curious. So you got this feedback to, be less of a PM, more of a CEO. Like, is there like one habit or behavior that you've changed since then, and how's that gone?
We're out hiring for a bunch of PMs right now. That was like that was my biggest. That was the biggest takeaway.
Wow.
Yeah. So
these are the type of things that you're like, huh. I like, obviously you don't pay for Granola, but like you should be paying a lot more to Granola for that insight. Like that is hugely valuable to get that.
Yeah.
I love that you're asking like, hey, what question should I have for my executive team? Because like that is one of my favorite Ask Granola questions every week. Like without that, I have a Zap set up now. That
cool.
Just like, every week, go Ask Granola, turn this act, and it spits it back for me. The other one I started doing as well is, this year I've gotten a lot more active on social, in part because like we're trying to do more enterprise sales, and like the algorithms love human accounts versus, corporate accounts and stuff like that. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go figure out how to do this thing. And one of the like easy ways for me to do it is the same thing. It's like, hey, what have I talked about in the last week that might make for good fodder on LinkedIn? And so it just takes the
you've set that up yourself? Is that
right?
I
set it up myself. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
It just takes the like pressure off of like constantly having to think of like what might be interesting or good.
Yeah.
And instead I just go, oh yeah, that would be a good thing. And then I have I work with another person on it, like, hey, let's go figure out how to like shape this and craft this so that the algorithm's going to like it. Also, I don't cringe too much.
yeah, that's the perfect type of task for it. We have my chief of staff was working on one recently where like Nikita basically published like here are the things that the algorithm now like wants or supports, and like has put that into the recipe for this, and it's pretty cool. It'll be interesting how all this shifts, right? Like this is stuff that feels maybe a bit odd or novel to us now. I bet you in 6 months it'll be like unthinkable not to be doing this. And this is where like the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. I do think there's going to be such a huge difference between that like top 5% of early adopters and the rest of society. Like that said, I think one of the things I've changed my mind on, or I had the wrong intuitions, is that your average non-technical user, there's people who lean into AI and people who don't lean into AI, and those it doesn't seem like it necessarily really maps to like how technical they are, like what, it's just like, I don't know what it comes down to, but just some people love it and are into it and others aren't. And the ones who are into it, man, they know that like Gemini is good at this thing and I should be using Claude for this, and like stuff where it's like they're listing off model names that have like numbers in them. I'd never expect your average like person who's not, very technically like sophisticated to be like, oh yeah, man, Claude's really gone downhill this week. And it's like, well, like I thought I was in a bubble, but you're not in my bubble and you're saying the same stuff. So I don't really know what's going on.
Some real estate agent in the middle of the country is just like dialed in on the latest models. Yeah, it's wild. Well, speaking of like early adopter, like last thing before we sign off, I want to hear what is your like one AI use case not with Granola that you've just fallen in love with? The thing that you're like, this is really changing the way I do work. I ask this question to a lot of folks. It's wild how often the answer is Granola.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, it's. I mean, we try to use it for. We're always trying to push the bounds of what we use it for, right? So it's like, I don't have. Maybe I don't know if this goes into the podcast or not, but basically, like, it's this really weird thing. I use AI a lot, but I primarily use OpenAI, Claude, and Granola. I use Granola the most by far, and then those other two. For specific reasons. I don't use a lot of other bespoke tools outside of coding, right? But I think coding's like my answers are not going to be that special or insightful there. And because we push ourselves to use Granola for almost everything, I think I'm really failing at this question.
I am curious, what do you go to ChatGPT or Claude for? Is there like a use case that you're like, this is where I land?
Yeah, I use it for questions that are about the world, if that makes sense. So it's like if the question's more, so it's interesting. It's like there's basically in my mind, I'm like, is this a question where it's like my personal context is more important, or like world context is more important? And when it's world context is more important, then I'll go to ChatGPT or Claude.
At a new restaurant, like, hey, what's popular here?
Exactly.
Scroll through all the reviews on Yelp or something.
Exactly. That kind of thing. Or like, I don't know, like, what's this? How does this tax work? Like that kind of thing. Yeah. It's perfect for that. Increasingly, I used to do things where I'd like upload a bunch of documents to Claude or ChatGPT and then like have it use that context. I increasingly do that in Granola more and more because you can do that in there. I don't know, man. I don't have a great pithy. What's the answer for you? Like, what's your killer AI use case that's not Zapier or Granola?
So it's interestingly, like, my stack is pretty small. To your point, it's Zapier and agents. It's Granola. It's ChatGPT, and then some like Claude and Gemini at times for various other things.
Yeah.
But outside of like those tools, I'm pretty sporadic, honestly.
Yeah.
So it like this is where I do think my sense is that AI adoption right now is following a pretty extreme power law, where there's a handful of tools that are getting pretty massive adoption.
Yeah.
And then there is some like boutique niche things that folks are using because it's important to them. It's like, hey, I want the best in breed of this thing, kind of like your friend who had 15 or whatever tools.
Yeah.
It's not like there is a huge long tail. I think partly it's just because like the out of the box stuff is pretty good at most things.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it does take a lot to like pull you into another product at the end of the day.
Cool.
Awesome. Chris,
thank you so much. Yeah,
it was a blast. Like I said, Granola, it's one of the best tools in my own toolkit. So thank you for building it, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Likewise. Thank you so much, man. Cheers.